This is Audible.
Brilliance Audio.
What She Saw by Mary Burton, performed by Samara Naomi, James Anderson Foster, Andrew Iden, and Patrick Lawler. Prologue, Rafe Colton, Thursday, July 31st, 2025, 11 a.m., Red Onion State Prison, Pound, Virginia. In prison, I learned to appreciate the little things. Cracks in a wall, a bug scurrying along the floor, underlined words in a dog-eared prison library book, or when a prisoner's smile turned feral. Cells didn't offer me the big picture, but they taught me focus. Front and center in my mind were the lumpy mattress in the prison hospital bed, the IVs running from my arms, and a machine beeping in time to my slow and sloppy heartbeat. The doctors said my cancer was worse. I would be dead in a year or two. Some say I should be relieved. This disease would end 3 decades in prison. But I liked living, and I wanted to squeeze out all I could of what was left. A female nurse sat across the room reading charts. Mousy brown hair was secured in a tight bun. She was younger than me, mid-30s to early 40s. Her skin still had some life in it, but it wasn't glassy smooth like a teenager's. A few lines had etched into creases around her eyes, marking a lifetime of disappointments. Half glasses reminded me of a librarian I'd had in middle school, Mrs. Davenport. Alone at night, I've dreamed about the nurse. What did she look like in her teen years? Was that hair silken? Were her curves tight and hot? Was her skin soft? I rubbed my fingers against the coarse prison sheets and tried to remember the feel of a young woman's smooth skin. Memories were too distant to grab. Sighing, I curled my fingers into a fist. Time hadn't been kind to me either, but it isn't charitable to most of us. "Darling, could you do me a favor?" I asked. The nurse looked up. "I sure could use a drink of water, darling." My lips slid into a slight grin. The nurse's expression softened. Time hadn't robbed me of all my charms. When I was younger, I enjoyed many appreciative glances from females. Now I missed the way their eyes glistened and their lips parted as they watched me move. She filled a cup with water and carried it to my bedside. I took the plastic, careful to brush my fingers against hers. The V of her scrubs dipped low, as if she wanted me to see the curve of her breasts. Her boxy top didn't hide her narrow waist and rounded hips, and I bet her calves had a nice shape despite the comfortable black shoes. She didn't wear perfume, and her skin carried the scent of a sensible soap. Once I was surrounded by young women who smelled like mountain flowers and sex. I sipped the water, letting the cool liquid roll down my dry throat. "Thank you, darling. I appreciate you." Her face remained neutral, but her eyes grew expectant. Her head tilted. She wanted to smile, but she didn't. I liked knowing I could charm a woman with a grin. I was old and dying, but still vain. The door buzzer chimed. The moment broke. The nurse took the cup back and crossed to the security door. She opened it to a man dressed in a dark suit, white shirt, and sensible shoes. A cop. There's no missing a law enforcement officer's demeanor. The good ones are always tense, anticipating trouble and ready to spring. This guy was a tiger coiled, prepared to pounce. We'd met twice before. Sergeant Grant McKenna. He hadn't shared much of his own past, but he'd questioned me about the crimes that earned me a life sentence. The papers and the cops called me the Mountain Music Festival Killer and dubbed my so-called victims the Festival Four. Not the coolest monikers, but they stuck. The powers that be tried and convicted me of 4 murders 3 decades ago. To this day, I still professed my innocence. I was framed. The cops had never found the bodies, and I argued the Commonwealth's case was based on physical evidence planted in my barn. A prison guard stepped inside the clinic and stationed himself by the door. I sat straighter, wincing as I adjusted the pillow behind my bony back. The handcuffs that bound my left wrist to the bed dug into my fragile skin. Grant knew the basic facts about me and had a working knowledge of my case. I didn't know how deep he'd dived into the finer points, but he knew enough. I was flattered he was there. I hadn't had many visitors in recent years, though there was a time when the Mountain Music Festival killer eclipsed Charles Manson, Ted Bundy, and John Wayne Gacy. According to the cops and press, my rampage spanned not years, but a 6-hour window. Psychologists assumed I would have killed more women if the cops hadn't stopped me. My splash in the headlines was intense and brief. No one remembered me now. I wasn't even a footnote. All that kept me relevant was the missing bodies. "Sergeant," I said. "Mr. Colton." He extended his hand to me. I took it, disarmed by this very human gesture. I was amazed the guard allowed it. "How's retirement?" "Can't complain." Grant withdrew his hand and pulled up a chair. "Washington, D.C., right? Homicide? Good memory. Living on the pension now?" Grant leveled his gaze on mine. "Basically." "Why aren't you enjoying retirement?" "Guys like you and me never really leave the game, do we?" Many cops were filled with unspoken rage. Past traumas, unsolved cases, killers who got away. It all haunted them. They came here hoping that if they found the Mountain Music Festival bodies, they would find salvation. However, the good cops hid their emotions well, and I'd established that Grant was one of the good ones. Grant watched me closely. "I hear you're up for another parole hearing. Your chances look good this time." "I'm no threat to anyone," I said. "Finishing out my days in the mountains isn't too much to ask, is it?" He regarded me for a beat. "You want to return to Dawson?" "Yes." Grant never brought a notepad or file, but I suspected his memory was laser sharp. "The parole board will be reviewing your case next month. Compassionate releases are popular." Release. I'd heard that word before, but after too many disappointments, I didn't dare allow any emotion. I crossed my fingers. From your lips to God's ears. Grant folded his arms over his chest. He was fit, lifted weights, a runner. We'd made small talk about workouts during his last visit. I exercised any chance I got. It paid to be strong in here. "I spoke at a conference a few weeks ago," Grant said. "No small talk today. About me, I hope. Your case, among others. What was the theme?" "Convictions without bodies." "Interesting. You get a lot of cases like that?" "Enough. Must be frustrating for the police and the families. No closure. And the judges and juries struggle to justify convictions like mine. How many of them wonder if they put away an innocent man like me?" "I don't know." Grant sat back, unbuttoning his jacket. I appreciated that he dressed the part of a professional lawman. I bet a lot of them worry and wonder if they made the right call. "You willing to tell me where you buried those bodies?" Grant asked. "No foreplay today?" I chuckled. "Direct, to the point. But girls like a little warm-up before the big event." Years ago, the police and prosecutors had dangled a reduced sentence if I told them where the bodies were. Even if I had known, I wouldn't have told. Cops can lie, and I don't trust them. Plus, I'd grown to enjoy the mystery of this unfinished story. All humans chase attention. We pursue it in different ways. Some get on the stage, some publish. Others get tattooed or choose the perfect personalized license plate. Anyone who says they don't want to be noticed doesn't know how to escape the shadows. My silence kept me center stage. Maybe it wasn't the attention I'd once craved, but visits like this broke up the monotony of prison life. Beggars couldn't be choosers. I'm an innocent man. I'd made this statement so many times the words had conjoined. You've said that. The Mountain Music Festival and the Festival for Victims are ancient history. Not everyone has forgotten. I bet you can count those that remember on one hand. I'm driving to Dawson, Grant said. My memories of Dawson relied now on pictures I'd clipped from articles about the Festival 4. Those images were black and white and at least a decade old. They didn't capture the vivid blue skies, the rolling green mountains, or the scent of honeysuckle in spring. It's a small, middle-of-nowhere town. I consider that an asset. His southern accent was faint, but strengthened as he spoke about Dawson. I'd bet it was his hometown, or it reminded him of home. You're going to Dawson for peace and quiet? There's a writer working this story. I've met her. She's sharp, tenacious. She's headed to Dawson. He was teasing me. Dawson, the case, a woman. You think she'll do what cops in 31 years couldn't do? She might. Is she writing a book about me and all those missing women? I don't know. Maybe. Talking about a woman who was thinking about me was tantalizing. You have a hard-on for her? He didn't answer. Ah, a good Southern gentleman. I pressed, sensing a tender spot. Are you trying to woo her with my deep, dark confession? Grant shifted, smoothing a wrinkle from his suit jacket with long, tanned fingers. Men have jumped through hoops for a pretty woman since Adam and Eve. I'm no different. Ah, this was the part where he pretended that he was my pal, my buddy. What we won't do for a woman. You have a few words of wisdom? Grant asked. You were always good with the ladies. It's been 31 years. I'm out of practice. But riding a woman came naturally, and I bet I'd have no problem if I ever had the chance again. You overestimate me. He grinned. I don't think so. Grant was good. He was baiting a hook, and I shouldn't have taken the bite, but I couldn't resist. Tell me more about this woman. Blonde? Brunette? Tall? Short? My mind ran wild with possibilities. Does she have a name? Her name is Sloane Grayson. Dark hair, very attractive. The cop's voice softened just a fraction. Grant liked Sloane Grayson's look. I don't get to read too much true crime in prison. Is she a good writer? She is. Grant's gaze and face remained relaxed, but his fingers opened and closed once into a fist. Tell Ms. Grayson I don't know where the Festival 4 are. A polygraph proved that. I bet you run circles around a polygraph. Talk of Dawson and Sloane Grayson stirred a longing I'd suppressed for years. If I don't get out in time to join you in Dawson, keep me posted. I'd like to see what you unearth. A smile tipped my lips. Excuse the bad pun. I find amusement where I can.
Chapter 1. Joe Keller. Friday, May 20th, 1994, 8 a.m. 10 hours until the festival. Stardom. Joe Keller knew the young woman beside him spent her days dreaming of fame. She was a sweet little thing with blonde hair and big brown eyes. Had tits a man could get lost in. Like all the others, she saw herself standing on a stage with bright lights shining down as she strummed long fingers over her guitar. Her kind went to bed at night hearing the cheering crowds. He'd crossed paths with a lot of girls like her in his days as a guitarist and roadie. Joe took a ride off the main road. Once he'd dreamed of having assistants who'd take care of his needs. They'd drive him everywhere, stock his dressing room with his favorite hamburgers and lines of Coke, and they'd shine his collection of guitars. Everyone kissed your ass at the top. That's what he'd wanted when he was her age. You with one of the bands? He asked. She shifted, balancing her blue guitar case between her legs. No, but I'm hoping to get some playing time on stage. Are you in a band? I used to play guitar. It was hard not to stare at her face. You dreaming about being a star? Yeah, who doesn't? She wanted new outfits, hair and makeup assistants, and costumes that glittered with rhinestones. She wanted everyone to know she was a star. One day she'd be impossible to ignore. If he had a nickel for all the girls like this one. She gripped her guitar case again as he took another turn onto a small mountain road. He downshifted, knowing the hills required the engine to grip harder. Her blue guitar case was beat up and covered with stickers naming cities that he'd bet she'd never seen. Nice case, he said, hoping to draw her out. The bright blue case had caught his attention as she walked down the road by Dawson's bus station. Didn't take a detective to know she had her sights set on the big music festival scheduled to kick off later today. She couldn't have been more than 18 or 19. You're too young to have a history like that. She glanced at a tattered Nashville sticker. I bought it used. I like its history. You hear any stories about the case? She tucked a blonde curl behind her ear. The pawn shop owner told me the woman who'd owned it played with the Rolling Stones in the 60s. I hope to have those kinds of experiences. Don't hurry your life. He'd done his share of rushing, and he'd made a lot of mistakes. I'm Joe, by the way. Laurie. The truck's engine groaned loudly as he drove up the steepening hill. The split plastic seat crackled under his ass as he shifted. A fine sheen of cigarette ash covered his dashboard. When he was alone, he didn't care, but with Laurie, he wished it were cleaner. What brings you here? Joe asked. I was working in a diner in Waynesboro. Then a guy came in for coffee. He had a Kurt Cobain vibe. He was lean, and his dark glasses accentuated his chiseled features. After his coffee, he asked if he could hang a few posters. My boss said yes, and Kurt taped flyers in the front window as well as the men's and women's bathrooms. I offered him a soda. He said yes, and he told me about the festival. He made it sound so huge. She'd described the festival promoter, Rafe Colton. Rafe had always been fast and loose with the truth. It's going to be something. What are you doing at the festival? Delivering equipment, stages, lighting, and rigging. All the unsexy stuff that makes the show work. And I'll play a few sets with the Terrible Tuesdays. Her eyes brightened with interest. So, you're going to get on stage? No guarantees. Right now, I'm a delivery driver with a guitar. I drop my deliveries and I might get to play a few sets. Nothing fancy. The promoter is looking for new artists. They have these kinds of events in the big cities like Nashville, but never in Dawson. I'm lucky. And you took the bus to Dawson? I'd planned to drive, but my car gave out 3 days ago. I hoped the bus would drop me off closer. More walking than I figured. And then I came along. She grinned. Lucky me. Joe rubbed his hand over his scraggly beard. He looked older than 40, but he liked to think he still had game. The tattoos that covered his arms showed life experiences like Laurie's guitar case. You'll wow the crowds, he said. You think so? You haven't heard me play. You have an energy, a vibe. The producers call it the it vibe. Thanks. I'm hoping to wow the crowds. Anyone willing to walk down a road with a guitar in this heat wants fame. It's all I've wanted since I was a little girl, she said. You ever been on stage before? A few times. None of my gigs have been much to brag about. Coffee shops, high school talent shows, and a small church festival. But you gotta start small, right? Yeah, You do. Joe slowed the van. Laurie looked toward the trucks hauling stage equipment as he nosed the truck toward the festival entrance, which funneled into an open field. She shifted in her seat, tightening her grip on the guitar. Joe took a right turn into the main entrance. The setting for the festival was beautiful. A bright blue sky provided a backdrop to rolling hills. An old gray farmhouse sat nestled among a collection of oak trees, and beyond the house, plump gray clouds lurked as if trying to decide whether rain was worth the effort. The truck rolled and belched as it moved down the dusty road. Joe rounded a corner away from the farmhouse. Ahead were more trucks and workmen hoisting the lights of a 50-foot stage outfitted with sound equipment. He parked next to a collection of vans and small trucks. All were open and being unloaded. "There's so much happening," she said. "Controlled chaos. This is the calm before the storm." She sat a little straighter. "I can't wait." He rested his massive inked forearms on the steering wheel. He stared at the people unloading boxes, setting up vending stands, and hanging Mountain Music Festival t-shirts and posters. In the light of day, it always looks like a bright, shiny penny, but night is coming. So be careful, Laurie. "My dad split when I was 10. I learned how to handle myself. I'll be fine, Joe. Not my first rodeo." "A regular sage," he quipped. "I'm young, but I'm not stupid." "That's good. Keep your thinking hat on, Laurie. I've worked Rafe Colton events before. They always get crazy." He wasn't sure why he felt the need to caution her. "I've seen girls like you get eaten up." Her smile told him his warning flew right past her. "Thanks, Joe. I promise to be careful." "There's a hamburger vendor setting up," he said. "I bet you could pick up a few hours of work, and they'll feed you if you're hungry." "Thanks. I'll do that." He reached for a rumpled receipt on the seat and scribbled a number on it. "This is my number. After the festival, if you have questions, give me a call." She stared at the bold numbers as she reached for the door handle. "Why do you look so worried, Joe?" "Like I said, I've worked this kind of event before." "You're a nice man." He drew in a breath until the full expanse of his chest pressed against his t-shirt. Not so nice. And there are going to be worse than me out there over the next 18 hours. She opened the door and gripped the handle of her guitar case in her right hand. Her stomach grumbled. She laughed. "A burger would be nice." "Best of luck." She waved to Joe and walked toward the crowd. When she reached the first food vendor, she glanced back and caught his gaze. She smiled, then introduced herself to the young woman setting up the burger station. A horn honked, drawing Joe's attention back to the job at hand. He had some pull with a few of the bands. He'd find a way to get her a show business break. And maybe, who knows, maybe they could find a quiet spot and she could thank him properly.
Chapter 2. Sloan. Friday, August 15th, 2025, 12 p.m. Dawson, Virginia. It wasn't the first time I'd visited the small town of Dawson, nestled in the mountains of central Virginia. Located 20 miles northeast of Interstate 64, between Charlottesville and Waynesboro, Dawson was a favorite stop for history buffs, wine enthusiasts, sightseers, or anyone looking for a burger or a bathroom break. The town's year-round residents hovered around 5,000, but during the summer and fall tourist seasons, when visitors filled rental properties tucked in the hills and valleys, the population swelled to 4 times that. I'd arrived during a shoulder week. Summer vacationers had left because public schools and colleges were back in session, and it would be 2 weeks before Labor Day when the fall hikers arrived. Basically, rents were lower right now. I'd rented a mountain cottage so far off the beaten path that even in high season, few wanted it. My budget liked small, rustic cabins in hard-to-reach places. I found the rental office on Main Street and parked my Jeep in front. Midday was slow in Dawson, but the pace would pick up a little around the dinner rush. Out of the Jeep, I shouldered my backpack and crossed to the rental office. Agencies usually sent me an entry code, so I didn't have to bother with check-in. But when I'd rented the place, I was told there was no electronic lock on the cabin. Too much trouble to change the batteries. Okay. Not ideal, but I was here to work, not play. Bells jingled as I pushed open the door to an office. 2 empty desks greeted me. The walls were covered in images of homes far nicer than I could ever afford. My little cabin wasn't featured in any framed print. I walked up to the front desk and rapped my knuckles against faux wood. Hello? Footsteps shifted, and a toilet flushed. Seconds later, a woman in her late 40s emerged from a restroom, drying her hands. Her blonde hair was styled into a ponytail, and makeup enhanced handsome features. She wasn't tall, and her figure looked as if it were carrying a few extra pounds under a cotton top that skimmed over designer jeans narrowing to custom boots. I had interacted with rich folks when I'd been hired for a couple of ghostwriting gigs. With rich people, it's not the clothes or cars that are the tell, but the attitude. One woman who came from old tobacco money wanted her life story told, but didn't like worrying over the details. Another trust funder who looked homeless wanted his vision for the future enshrined on the page. I could have told them both their stories wouldn't sell, but I didn't because the money was good. Both had liked my final product, but to my knowledge, neither book had been published. Well, hello there, the woman said. She tossed her paper towel into a trash can and extended her hand. I'm Bailey Briggs-Jones. What can I do for you? In the weeks after the concert, Sheriff C.J. Taggart had interviewed Bailey Briggs, who'd been seen at the concert with one of the Festival 4 victims, Deborah Jackson. Bailey had admitted under oath that she'd seen Deborah at the concert and they'd chatted about high school. She'd been very calm when she testified that she'd left the concert via the Fire Road around 1 o'clock a.m. and hitchhiked home. I'm Sloane Grayson. I hoisted my backpack higher on my shoulder. I rented a cabin and I need to pick up the keys. Pick up the keys? Bailey laughed. That's a blast from the past. We have 2 rentals like that now. Seeing as the Sawyer place is already rented, you must be after the Taggart cabin. Taggart, that's right. We haven't had much interest in that cabin for a while, and his great-nephew is on the verge of selling it. She opened a drawer at the first desk and removed a set of 3 old keys on a ring. The locks are old, but they work. I'm sure it'll be fine. Bailey gripped the keys in manicured hands before she dropped them in my calloused palm. You here for 2 weeks? That's what I've paid for, but who knows? Is the cabin rented after my stay? Lord, no, you could keep it all September. Good to know. Why would a young gal like you want to hide away in an old cabin in the woods? A quiet place to work, and I'm on a deadline. Are you one of those true crime writers? Why would you ask that? The only people who have ever had any real interest in Taggart's cabin were into solving crimes. If I feigned ignorance, I learned more. People love to talk and prove they were in the know. What crime? Taggart was the sheriff in Dawson for over 20 years. He investigated the Mountain Music Festival murders. She spoke as if the facts were ingrained. I read something about that. Who are you writing for? I have a contract with a magazine. The circulation isn't huge. Why come here? She shook her head. We see hikers and mountain bikers in Dawson, not riders. Easier to concentrate if I don't have interruptions? You won't get any at the cabin. It doesn't have Wi-Fi or cell service. You'll have to drive down the mountain to get your phone to work. The coffee maker is an automatic drip, so buy a bag of ground coffee. Clean sheets and towels are in the storage closet. There's a television and VHS player. Taggart liked his westerns and old war movies. Sounds perfect. And how did you find our agency? Bailey's voice rose with the question. Dawson made the top 10 list for out-of-the-way haunted mountain locations. Your agency is one of 2 in town. She nodded. We had a ghost hunter stay at the cabin about 2 years ago. He didn't stay but a couple of nights. Is the house haunted? Depends. Are you scared of ghosts? The dead never bothered me. Trouble tended to follow the living. No. I figure once you're crossed over, you're no real threat to me. That's very brave of you. I'm not so courageous. I'm sure the dead are watching and I don't like it. Why are ghosts watching you? Gold beaded bracelets on her wrist rattled as she brushed back a wisp of dyed blonde hair. Unfinished business? Bailey's smooth skin had the look of Botox and fillers, but her eyes reflected a distance that belied her pleasant expression. But I imagined when she was younger, she was stunning. Fair enough. The living have their share of it, too. Either way, I don't like being around anything spooky. You're one brave woman. Ghosts, dogs, and I get along fine. She laughed. Well, Sloan, enjoy your stay. Remember, no Wi-Fi or cell phone service, but if you need a signal or anything else, the convenience store at the bottom of the mountain is the place to go. Thanks, Bailey. I'd learned long ago to play along, smile. Sooner or later, they'd figure out what I was about, but for now, I wasn't interested in bearing all. The cabin isn't on my GPS, I said. No, it wouldn't be. As far as the satellites are concerned, that part of the world doesn't exist. She reached for her phone in a rhinestone case and texted me a PDF. Follow those directions and you'll find it. Download it now. I selected the attachment. Will do. Make sure you're gassed up and have groceries. It's a 30-minute drive to the cabin, and that's in good weather. I'll stop on the way out of town. Her head tilted as she stared at me. Well, I hope you enjoy your stay, Sloan Grayson. She hesitated. Grayson? You have family in the area? No. Thanks, Bailey. I'm sure I'll see you around. Out the front door, I settled in the Jeep and hooked the cabin keys on my ring. I drove down Main Street, absorbing the feel of Dawson. What had initially put the place on the map was the railroad. In its heyday, the old farm town shipped produce to restaurants as far north as Washington, D.C. and New York City. Some visitors had come to Dawson looking for healing springs, promising cures for a variety of ailments. Others had come in search of gold in mines that were quickly played out. Little old Dawson had enjoyed good times for about 40 years. And then the interstate was built and goods shifted from rail to tractor trailers. The town hit hard times in the late 80s and early 90s. Dawson leaders had hoped to turn their hamlet into a hub for music festivals. They'd enjoyed a little success. Then the mayor had booked the Mountain Music Festival 31 years ago. That event was supposed to cement Dawson's reputation. And it did, but not as anyone expected. As bands played through the night, 4 women vanished from the festival. Almost immediately, expected profits evaporated, and the town was gripped with worry and fear as the sheriff searched for the killer. The killer was caught, but the women were never found. Not a win-win, but justice had been satisfied. Still, even after the sheriff arrested his man, vendors stayed away from Dawson for at least 15 years. Restaurants and inns closed, many Main Street businesses shuttered. And the only tourism came in the form of reporters and thrill-seekers drawn to the newest murder capital of the South. The locals made peace with their dark past, and everyone agreed to keep it buried along with the women. Memories faded, and the names of the missing were forgotten. Discount real estate prices attracted investors, vineyards, and a new wave of festival events. Having fun and making money trumped old fears. For the last 5 years, music festivals had become a major moneymaker for Dawson. The town had thrived. Now the little town's 200-year-old buildings were fit for any tourism brochure. Brick establishments that had serviced failed gold mine offices, railroads, banks, and feed stores now housed tiny clothing boutiques, cafes, and bars. At the end of Main Street was the Depot Diner, untouched since the 50s. The Depot was the lone holdout to change. I parked in front of the grocery store, grabbed my backpack, and hurried inside. I somehow picked the one cart with a bad wheel that turned backward as I moved up the center aisle. Mac and cheese, cookies, soups, luncheon meats, coffee, and stovetop stuffing were my go-to travel work foods. I always argued that carbs fueled my brain when I was pulling a lot of facts together. I grabbed a box of strawberry Pop-Tarts and a 6-pack of soda. At checkout, the clerk rang up my purchases. She was in her mid-50s and had pulled her gray hair back in a ponytail, unable to contain all the flyaway hairs. You have any coupons? No coupons. She looked up at me. She'd pegged me as a tourist. I expected no privacy in a small town. If this lady didn't ask questions about me, Bailey would. If you come back on Thursday, we have a 5% discount. Great. I'll keep that in mind. I swiped my credit card and said a small prayer that I'd not hit the limit. The transaction went through, and she handed me my receipt. Where are you staying? Up the road? One of the old properties or a new one? Old. Before she could ask anything else, I grabbed my groceries and left the store. Maybe if I'd come during the high season, I'd have blended better, But the shoulder week rates were hard to beat. With Bailey's directions pulled up on my phone, I drove west toward the mountains. I passed the convenience store and took the right up the mountain road. But I almost missed the blue Taggart cabin sign. My tires kicked up dirt as I stopped and took a right onto a narrower road. For another mile, I wound up the road curving around the mountain. The pitch grew steeper, and in several spots the shoulder half slid off the mountain. It didn't take many guesses to figure out why someone who had no interest in people chose this location. No one ever dropped by here by accident. As my Jeep engine strained up the hill, the red light on my gas gauge caught my attention. Bailey had told me to tank up, but I'd calculated I had another 50 miles of driving. If I didn't press too hard, I could still make it if I coasted downhill back toward town tomorrow. I spotted the last blue arrow and took another left. Minutes later, the narrow road opened to a small field with a log cabin in the center. Gravel popped under my tires as I drew closer to the porch, which looked as if a strong wind would topple it. I shut off the engine knowing I didn't have the gas to waste. I reached into the back seat and grabbed my groceries. My stomach rumbled and I fished out the box of Pop-Tarts and unwrapped a sleeve. I took a few bites, then climbed the 3 stairs to the porch. I fumbled with the keys and shoved it in the old lock. Door hinges groaned as I kicked open the door. The cabin was dark. The remaining daylight leaked through the thick canopy of trees and smudged windows. Bags slid to the floor and I fumbled around the wall until I found the light switch. The overhead bulbs didn't give off much light, but it was enough to see a large stone fireplace, recliner, couch, TV VCR, small round dining table, and galley kitchen beyond. Off to the left was a bedroom with a small double bed. I set the groceries on the yellow countertop and finished off my Pop-Tart. I drew in a breath as the sugar, fat, and chemicals hit my stomach and brain. Whatever vague promises I'd made last week about clean eating were too much of a reach now. As soon as I settled, I'd order eggs and whole wheat toast at the depot. Protein was brain food, right? The refrigerator was working and the interior clean. I unloaded the carton of milk, deli meat, and bread before lining up the rest of the non-perishables on the counter. As a kid, I'd liked the look of a full refrigerator. The sight had eased the faint anxiety always in my belly. A full fridge promised that tomorrow was going to be a good day. I moved from lamp to lamp, turning all 5 on. The extra light didn't chase away the gloom, but there were fewer shadows for the ghosts. Outside, I opened the Jeep's tailgate and unloaded a single box filled with color-coded files. Most of my work was in the cloud, but I still made paper copies because when the dots didn't connect, I pinned the papers on a wall, and the different perspective always revealed something new. From the glove box, I retrieved my holstered handgun, an accessory I always traveled with. I set the box near the recliner. The kitchen table wasn't large, but I dragged it to the center of the room. It would be my makeshift desk. My life had been crazy when I was a child, and it hadn't changed much since. To combat the chaos, I kept my physical world very organized. Because I traveled constantly for work, my life often narrowed to my desk and laptop. My happy place was sharpened pencils and a sunrise screensaver. I closed and locked the front door and sat in the recliner. Silence settled over the room. City life was filled with everyday sounds, but up here, there was nothing except the rustle of leaves and the chirp of birds. It was Taggart's decompression pod. Sheriff Charles James C.J. Taggart had taken the job as Dawson Sheriff in the spring of 1994. When he was hired, he'd recently left the Marines, where he'd worked 27 years as military police. Civilian law enforcement would have been a natural choice. He'd said in several interviews that he'd expected his duties would shift among speeding tickets, barking dogs, and the occasional drunk in town. He'd been looking forward to a slower pace because the work he'd done on the bases included rapes, assaults, and murders. Drunk Marines found trouble easily. When he'd first accepted the job as sheriff, he'd rented a house in town near the police station. From what I'd read, he'd adapted with ease. Originally from the area, he loved rural, small-town living. The town council had approved the Mountain Music Festival 6 weeks before he'd taken the job. Mayor Mike Briggs, a tall, imposing man, made his money in construction and real estate. He had painted the festival as a well-organized, family-friendly event during Taggart's job interview. The promoter, Rafe Colton, had a long, solid history of event planning. Taggart had told the sheriff's search committee that he'd looked forward to working the event. And a week after he was on the job, shit went sideways, and his life was fucked forever.
Chapter 3. C.J. Taggart. Friday, May 20th, 1994, 9 a.m. 9 hours until. Sheriff C.J. Taggart was already pissed, and his day hadn't started. He backed his Crown Vic into his reserved spot at the Dawson Sheriff's Office. He shoved the gear into park and shut off the engine. He didn't like to start the day mad, and he'd thought leaving the Marines and moving back east would solve that. It hadn't. He pushed out a breath, climbed from the car, and grabbed his hat and settled it on his flat-top haircut. As he crossed the cracked asphalt, he fumbled with his keys and found the one that opened the station's back door. The door open, he heard the slow, steady voice of Deputy Sean Duke, who worked the night shift. He'd been with the department for 15 years and manned the phones and jail. Taggart passed the framed photos of the 5 other men who'd served as Dawson's sheriff. They all had a stern, rigid stance that reminded him of himself. Law enforcement attracted a personality type. The dispatcher was trying to reason with a caller complaining about a noisy neighbor. Taggart didn't need to hear the caller to know. Loud music, partying, fast cars cutting donuts on a dirt road. Standard small-town stuff that he now wanted in his day. The Mountain Music Festival loomed today. Despite assurances that this was a family-friendly event, the festival had been tossing out warning signs. The festival proposal had been thin on details. As soon as he'd read it, Taggart had called Mayor Briggs and talked about pulling the plug on the event. Briggs shot down Taggart's objections over the poor security, limited venue entries and exits, and minimal toilet facilities. If his worries played out, too many people were going to descend onto Dawson tonight. He thought civilian life would be different from the military. He thought guys who'd never worn a uniform would be more adept at making decisions. He'd assumed that, outside of the military, civilians made more logical choices. But guys like Mayor Briggs proved him wrong. Incompetent higher-ups existed in all walks of life. Taggart and Deputy Jed Paxton were the only LEOs available to work the festival's security tonight. Despite assurances from the mayor, he worried this event was an accident waiting to happen. What could go wrong, the mayor had asked. Taggart had forbidden that question among his long-range recon team when they were in North Vietnam. Anyone stupid enough to tempt fate found himself isolated by the unit and exposed to landmines, stray bullets, or a fall off a cliff. Fate had no problem punishing the naive or stupid. He moved into his office and hung his hat on a peg behind his desk, which had a pile of pink message slips on it. He'd already learned that most calls were mundane, but to assume there were no issues would irritate fate. "Sheriff?" Taggart met his deputy's gaze. Jed Paxton was 22 and had been with the department a year. Paxton had been born in Dawson, and his father had once been mayor of the town. Paxton was tall, with big shoulders and thick black hair. He had been the star of the local football team, and women still flirted with him because he'd always be the high school hero. By the same age, Taggart had been a Marine for 5 years, been shot in Vietnam, and completed a 60-day rehab stint in a Tokyo military hospital. For Taggart's 22nd birthday, Uncle Sam had ordered him to Okinawa as a military police officer. "What do you need, Deputy?" Taggart asked. "Mayor Briggs is on his way. He wants to talk to you about the music festival." "Is there an issue?" He'd written a detailed critique of the festival proposal. "He's not happy with your security recommendations." No surprise that the mayor had not liked Taggart's memo. Top brass, civilian or military, rarely listened to common sense. "Anything else?" Taggart asked. "No, sir." "When's he stopping by?" The pink messages reported noise complaints, a missing dog, and gunshots near the Nelson farm. Now, Taggart glanced at the clock. 9 a.m. This amounted to a surprise inspection. He singled out a pink slip. Who called in the report of gunshots near the Nelson farm? Mrs. Nelson. She thinks the Crawford boys are target shooting in the woods again. That section of the county was wooded, and the land was billy-goat steep. Remind me, who are the Crawford boys? Zeke and Sammy. They live on the mountain across from the Nelson farm in a small cabin. They've lived up there since they were born and know the mountains like the backs of their hands. They like to target shoot and hunt. It's out of season. They don't recognize the government. They hunt when they want to. Getting them off the mountain would require an army. Are they a threat? Paxton hitched his thumb to his gun belt. Beyond not paying the $15 hunting license fee and growing weed? No, they keep to themselves. For now, Taggart had bigger issues than hunting licenses. In the outer office, the door opened and closed. He ran his hand along his tie and straightened his shoulders, straining the starched creases of his uniform. Mayor Briggs appeared in the doorway. Taggart didn't extend his hand. "What can I do for you, Mayor Briggs?" Mayor Briggs glanced at Paxton. "Hey, Jed. Tell your dad I'm looking forward to our tea time tomorrow." "Will do, sir." Paxton moved toward the door. "Can I get you a coffee?" "No, thank you. Close the door on your way out." Paxton nodded, not glancing in Taggart's direction, and closed the door. Taggart motioned toward a set of 2 chairs angled in front of his desk. "Would you like to have a seat?" They'd attended the same high school, but Taggart had been 5 years ahead of Briggs. Whereas Briggs took summer vacations during his high school years, Taggart had been changing oil, spark plugs, or transmission fluid in his stepfather's garage. "I won't be here that long. What can I do for you?" "Your evaluation of the festival has a few of the council members worried. I have real concerns. I want to cancel it until Colton addresses the issues. We're not shutting it down. Canceling now would be like leaving the bride at the altar. We got to go through with it." I sent a request to the state police for officers to work the music festival. This job is too much for Paxton and me to cover. The promoter has promised to hire private security. I've reached out to Mr. Colton twice, and he's not called me back. Briggs cleared his throat. "I'm in an election year, Sheriff Taggart. The locals aren't fond of state government, and they won't appreciate seeing state police patrolling their festival. Besides, we can't afford the extra manpower." Frustration scraped under his skin. The extra patrols are for everyone's own safety. They won't see it that way. And like I said, we can't afford the state guys. I've seen the lineup of the bands. They're not family-friendly. Estimates put festival attendance at 500 people. That's too much humanity for 3 men to police. And what if the crowd size surges? We won't see a surge. We'll be lucky to get to 500. This is a small regional concert with second-rate bands. Mr. Colton has assured me that he's hired extra security. Rafe Colton made a lot of promises, but the follow-ups never happened. Taggart worried this could be a problem. I need him to call me back and tell me how many extra men he's hired. Security is his problem. It says so in his contract. You're there to be the town's representative. 500 people was still 500 potential problems. If the festival gets out of control, it lands on me. Once night falls, people change. They get drunk, horny, and start thinking they can get away with more. And if you pack them into a small space, the chance of trouble goes up. Briggs shook his head. You keep assuming that there won't be enough security. Colton has not given me any solid numbers. Let me worry about Colton. Taggart's relationship with Briggs was new and untested, but he had always struggled to keep his opinion to himself. Colton is cutting corners. You're in the civilian world now, CJ, he said. Time to be more flexible." Taggart nodded even as his jaw pulsed. "I've heard your concerns, but I'm telling you, this event is going to be fine." Tension sliced up Taggart's spine, but too many years of respecting the chain of command kept him silent. "Roger that." Mayor Briggs's frown flipped into a quick, easy grin of even white teeth. "Excellent. I appreciate your trying to keep on top of this, but it's going to be fine. The depot is poised to make a nice fee off their food stand at the festival, and the t-shirt vendor has invested too much in the festival inventory. The economy is still soft, and they've all taken a hit in the last few years. This is their chance to get ahead." Main Street had several boarded-up businesses. Last year, the pharmacy and the bank had moved 30 miles east to Charlottesville. The few remaining businesses didn't get the traffic they had 5 years ago. The local furniture factory had shuttered, and though tourism was a moneymaker, it wasn't enough. The school budget was getting cut, and whatever forensic supplies Taggart's department needed remained on a wish list. The mayor and town council were eager for new business. They offered tax credits like candy, but so far, no bites. And until they filled the abandoned factory, tourism would have to make up the difference. Festival posters peppered the store windows, and folks were excited about its earning potential. After walking Briggs to the front door, Taggart rubbed the back of his neck as he moved to the break room and poured himself a cup of coffee. He sipped, reminding himself this wasn't war, and no one was shooting at him. Dawson was a quiet town. A couple of decades had shrunk his past problems with the town down to almost invisible. He hoped they stayed small. Little problems going forward. The muscles along his neck coiled tight and tense. He wanted to ease off the throttle and not worry, not push. He'd lost big while he was in the service because he'd pressed too hard. But old habits died hard. Like it or not, he couldn't shake the sense that trouble was circling.
Chapter 4. Sloan. Friday, August 15th, 2025, 2 p.m. After my desk was set up, I dumped a can of tomato soup into a small, clean, dented pot. I switched on the propane burner. As the soup heated, I opened a sleeve of crackers and nibbled. The cabinets had 4 bowls and 4 plates. In the drawers, an equal number of forks, knives, and spoons. Taggart was a kindred soul. I sat at the table and opened my laptop. Gusts of wind whipped outside, rattling the shingles and smacking the shutters against the house. The air was ripe with moisture, signaling a storm. I was used to solitude, but I was also used to Wi-Fi to stay connected to the world. The old Timex on my wrist was more sentimental than functional. Now, as I glanced at no bars on my phone, I reminded myself that I wanted to be here, to disconnect. But no bars meant no control, no access. That realization didn't ease the panic clenching in my chest. I crumbled crackers into my soup. The first few bites were hot, but the tomato-carb combo settled my stomach. And by the end, I felt more human. My stomach had been queasy for a few days. I'd ignored whatever illness it was and willed it away. I opened my file on Sheriff C.J. Taggart, the investigating officer for the Mountain Music Festival case. Born in 1944, Taggart was a throwback to a different generation. His father had died on the beaches of Anzio, Italy, and while his mother had married again, CJ and his stepfather never got along. At 17, he convinced his mother to sign a waiver allowing him to join the Marines. He'd served in Vietnam and been injured near Da Nang in 1965. According to his medical reports, bullets struck his right arm, left leg, and belly. Medics airlifted him to a field hospital and later to Japan to recover. After his release from the hospital in 1966, he joined the military police force in Okinawa, where he worked until 1993. At the age of 49, he'd been investigating the murder of a female soldier who'd been having an affair with a colonel. Taggart suspected the colonel. The brass told him to back down, which he hadn't done. The colonel kept his job, and Taggart left the Marines. After separating from the Marines, he'd traveled a bit, but eventually he grew bored and started looking for a job in civilian police work. A red glow warmed inside of the cabin. I looked out the window to see the sun setting toward the mountains. I walked outside to the front porch and watched as the red glow sank lower until it vanished behind the mountain. Lightning streaked across the sky. Taggart had lived in this cabin for 10 years. How many nights had he sat out here and watched the sunset? Or had he been so lost in his own troubles he didn't care to look? A phone rang, startling me. Staring at the flickering bar on my cell, I realized it wasn't mine. It was the yellow wall mount in the kitchen. I crossed to the phone, hesitating as my hand rested on the receiver. Weird not to know who was calling. I lifted the receiver to my ear. Hello? Sloan. The familiar, deep voice belonged to Grant McKenna. I pictured a tall, lean guy who wore a dark suit with a black tie. Sunglasses would have made him a perfect cast member for Men in Black. We'd met at a crime conference 6 weeks ago. I'd been speaking about my recently published article in the Washington Post. I'd investigated the murder of Suzanne Malone. Susie, as she was known to her friends, was 13 when she went for a bike ride near dusk. She didn't come home, and her parents called the police. Anyone who could help searched for her. Her body was found 3 days later, but her killer was never caught. Grant had been speaking earlier about murder convictions without a body. When I finished my presentation, he caught me as I was exiting the dais. He'd had several pointed questions about my presentation. He'd been paying close attention. I didn't understand his interest, and then he'd mentioned an upcoming parole hearing for Rafe Colton. My ears perked. I'd offered to buy him a drink. We'd huddled in the bar over beers, and then dinner, as I drilled him for information about Colton. After we shut down the bar, we ended up in my room. I remember the heady scent of desire and his rough hands reaching for the button on my jeans. I'd jerked off my shirt, and he had kissed the mounds of my breasts. My jeans had dropped in one yank, and I'd kicked them off. Seconds later, he'd pushed into me, shoving my back against the wall. I'd wrapped my legs around him, pulling him in as deeply as I could. Talking about the Malone case always left me agitated, and sex with Grant was the least dangerous way for me to let off steam. The sex had been urgent, exciting, and intoxicating. After the conference, we went our separate ways. We'd traded a few texts over the last 6 weeks, but hadn't spoken. If Grant had stuck to his plan, he'd seen Colton a week or two ago. You've arrived in Dawson? His logical, steady voice was relaxed, measured. I was standing on Taggart's porch, sunsets guaranteed to wow any tourist. How did you get the landline number? Doesn't take a detective to figure out where you'd stay in Dawson. I made a call or two and got the number. Aren't you clever? I don't picture you lounging in the woods. I remembered how much I enjoyed talking to him. No, I was rereading my files. I'm headed into town tomorrow to talk to Sheriff Paxton. Good start. He had a ringside seat at the festival, during the investigation, and at the trial. Grant said, hoping it shakes loose a different perspective. I tried to picture Grant. He'd said he had an office in a historic brick building in downtown Charlottesville, but he'd never quite explained what he did beyond collecting a retirement check. I'm sure you'll find a way to get his attention. Attention-getting is my superpower. Be careful, he warned. Don't assume everyone will be thrilled about you digging into a case marked closed. I'll tread lightly. How did your meeting with Colton go? As all the others. He's charming, loves the attention, offers no answers. His parole board meeting is still a go. It is. What do you think are his chances of getting out? Better than 50-50, unless you find those bodies. I'm doing what I can. Keep me posted. Will do. I ended the call and returned to the front porch. Tree branches rustled. A creature darted through the woods. An owl hooted. The darkness was restless. I thought back to our night at the conference and tried to define how I'd felt. He'd been exciting. I'd enjoyed his company. Yet when we went our separate ways, I didn't miss a beat. I felt basic emotions, such as sadness, anger, and sometimes happiness. But my feelings hovered near the low end of any emotional scale. I knew more intense feelings existed, but I couldn't grasp them. Sometimes my limited emotional bandwidth was a gift, and sometimes it wasn't. Unprocessed feelings created tension in my body that sooner or later needed an outlet. At times like that, my muscles cramped. Deep, watery breaths tightened my chest, and I felt as if I were drowning. When I was working on a Susie Malone-type article, negative physical side effects were common. Headaches, stomach pains, pressure in my chest. I let off steam by driving too fast on the interstate at night, breaking and entering, or having sex. I re-entered the house, locked the front door, and returned to my makeshift desk. A glance at my phone revealed no bars. If I wanted to talk on the phone, it would have to be the landline. I'd seen many shady places since I'd decided freelance writing suited my unwillingness to hold a regular job. I worked all the time. I could take a day off, but I rarely did. Work was my therapy, my way of dealing with all the crap that had been shadowing me since I was a kid. I sat in the recliner that must have been Taggart's. The cracked leather smelled of lemon, and I could imagine Bailey spritzing it with Febreze to mask any musky scent. The wear patterns on the arms told me the old sheriff has pushed his hands back and forth as he ruminated on the past. Was he pleased or haunted when he looked back? I glanced at the collection of 10 VHS tapes on the boxy television. Westerns. Clint Eastwood. I hoped Taggart's cabin was haunted. I hoped he understood that despite an arrest and conviction, the families had no resolution. 4 women had vanished on the night of May 20th, 1994. Though everyone believed the women were dead, I needed to find them. Thunder cracked, and lightning flashed across the sky outside, pulling me from my thoughts. Drawing in a breath, I rubbed my hands over the worn leather. I wanted to dig into Taggart's mind and follow in his steps. But he was dead, so I'd make do with the new sheriff, the victims' families, and the few remaining witnesses. There were missing pieces to this case, and I would find them. I would fill in the blank spaces and find the victims' bodies. Neither the answers nor the bones would transform me into a normal woman able to grieve the loss of her mother, who'd been one of the victims. But it was a step in the right direction.
Chapter 5. C.J. Taggart. Friday, May 20th, 1994. 10 a.m. 8 hours until. The festival was going to be a shit show. Briggs had told him again not to worry, it would all be fine. Fine. Taggart hated that word. It always foreshadowed disaster. He took the turnoff to the Nelson farm and wound his way up the road toward the venue. He'd been out to the farm a few days earlier. He'd walked the site and surveyed the entrance and exit locations. Beyond the main road, a rough-cut dirt service lane arrowed up the back of the property. It had been built for firefighting crews, but hadn't been used in years. According to the farm's owner, fallen trees had made it impassable to vehicles. If there was an emergency, this site was a bottleneck. Taggart had ordered 2 guys from Public Works to clear a path yesterday. This new escape route was rough, but it was better than nothing. Trucks and crews had arrived, and a large center stage had been constructed with the Green Mountains behind it. Workers hoisted lights up onto the rigging as other crews offloaded large speakers. Trucks with trailers were parked at angles to make room for others coming and going. Even with the limited number of vehicles present, it was difficult to maneuver. His worries doubled. Colton had picked this location for its spectacular Woodstock-type views, and right now it looked stunning and reinforced all Colton's promises. A split-rail fence ringed the farm, and beyond it stood a thick stand of trees. There was no security fencing to control anyone ready to slip in unnoticed. 500 people. Why did that number sound like Colton had pulled it out of his ass? Taggart drove over grass crushed flat by a dozen other vehicles. He passed the first aid trailer and parked near the depot's food tent. Inside the depot tent were prep tables, grills, and boxes of buns and condiments. The gal setting up the stations, Patty, worked the counter most breakfasts at the depot. She was tall and lean and had tied back her ink-black hair in a ponytail. She couldn't be more than 19 and already had a kid. In the last week, the depot had become a regular stop for him before work. Always friendly, Patty would fill his coffee cup before he settled on a counter stool. Another gal worked beside Patty in the tent. He didn't recognize her. She was young and blonde and wore her hair in braids woven with strands of beads. She listened as Patty pointed to all the stations in the tent. No doubt she was here for the festival. A rumbling, multicolored VW van pulled in behind his car. The van harkened back to the summer of '60, right before he shipped out to Saigon. During that long, hot summer, he'd yet to enter the Marines, and he'd been dating a girl who'd driven a VW van. Kelly. She hadn't been his first, but she'd made him feel things he never dreamed possible. He still looked back on their weekend fondly. A tall man rose out of this van. He had long dark hair that skimmed his shoulders, and a dark blue Mountain Music Festival t-shirt stretched over his muscled chest. His jeans and boots were worn, and his deeply tanned skin looked more suited for sunny beaches than cloudy mountains. Rafe Colton, the festival promoter. Taggart moved toward Colton. "Mr. Colton?" Colton's lips spread into a wide, disarming grin. His eyes twinkled with excitement. "Sheriff, call me Rafe." He made a grimace. "My dad is Mr. Colton." "Right. How's your day so far?" "Well, it was good until I walked up here." Colton's smile remained warm as his gaze turned curious. "Why is that? It's all coming together perfectly." He surveyed the stage. "This place is going to be alive with people, music, and love in less than 8 hours." "How are the ticket sales going?" Taggart asked. "Steady. About half sold." "Which means 250 bodies?" "Exactly right. We'll sell more at the gate, but I doubt we'll move all 500 tickets. This concert won't make anyone rich, but it's going to be beautiful, spiritual. The music, the open air, and good energy.
Keep listening to this audiobook. I've left you a link in the description so you can do it at no cost thanks to Audible's 30-day free trial.